Hi everybody, and welcome to Plant Care 101 DiMeco style. We're so excited you chose to join us here today, and hopefully you're going to leave with some great information that gives you the confidence that you have the competency to take care of the plants that you've brought into your home or office a little bit better than you've been feeling as you've been caring with them so far. We're hoping that you'll walk away from this video and today with a few new tidbits that maybe you weren't aware of before. So my name is Debbie Kaplan, and I lead the retail team here at DiMeco's. We have Jen behind the camera today, and Abby is in the store as well. So you may hear some other voices contributing to the video and the information we're looking to share today. So let's get going. One of the things that's really important to know about plants is that they're alive. And I know that sounds silly. It's just something good to remember, is that they're living, they are alive, they have a system to them, and all they're trying to do is live. So we have them as a partner in this relationship. They're going to do everything their system is programmed to do to keep them alive and thriving. And we're responsible for the environment that we bring them into, and also the variables which we would probably imagine is to put them in a place where the sunlight is appropriate for them, where the temperature feels good to them, where there's a good humidity for the type of plant they are, and that they receive the watering in intervals appropriate for the type of plant that they are. There's also fertilizers and pesticides to consider when necessary, and yet we're going to reserve those for another conversation and maybe just touch on them ever so briefly today. Let's start with choosing the right plant in case you're not beginning with plants at home and you are interested in bringing a plant home. When you are considering or going into a store like DiMeco's or another retail outlet, it's good to know what type of plant person you are. Will you be very involved in the plants? Are you interested in caring for them with different degrees of difficulty that they might have? Or would you like to start, which I usually recommend to customers who come into the store, with something that doesn't require quite as much plant know-how and not quite as much time. Now, time is in intervals. It's not standing over the plant for excruciating periods of time. It's just needing to check on them more frequently, or once a week, once every 7 to 10 days. And those are things to be mindful. What works in your life? What works with your current lifestyle? And you can always develop your plant care techniques and step outside of the simpler plant realms and delve into some of the ferns or aglaonemias or alocasia, actually a little more than aglaonemia. But it's good to start with something a little more simple if you haven't already been delving into plants and caring for them. Once you decide how involved with your plants you'd like to be, then it's good to know about the different plants and which might fall into the good starter plants and some into the more graduated caretaker plants. So once you know how involved you want to be, it's important to know the space that you intend to put your plant and the characteristics of that space that really matter to the plant. And first and foremost is always exposure to the sun and true light, or LED light, which is nice grow light as well. And we'll talk about ways to enhance your environment if it's not quite ideal for the plants that you'd like to bring in. It is important to know the exposure in the room, and not just whether or not the room gets light, but where the light's coming in from and versus where the plant might be placed. And one good thing to be familiar with is if you know the orientation of your room, then you will likely know whether the windows that face southeast, which is where the highest light is likely to come in from, versus your northwest facing windows, which will have your lower light, less direct sunlight coming in, and that's going to give you an idea of what plant might be best in which places in your home. So light is an important variable to be aware of, and also realize whether or not you might need to modify the light for a particular plant. So different ways to figure that that I've come up with. I do have my phone on me, and one of the apps that is helpful in getting a handle on the exposure that you might have is the compass. You can go to each of your windows and get an idea of the direction. And then if you're so inclined, there are also par meters which measure the light, and you can get an idea of how strong the light is. Not necessarily essential in purchasing plants and having plants, but the more involved you might want to be, or the more enthusiastic you become, that may be something worth investing in as your plant family grows. So sunlight is the first and foremost element to be mindful of. Plants will not grow in darkness. So some will handle low light and some will prefer high light and everything in between. And yet if you have a dark spot in your home, that is not a good place for a plant, unless you're going to bring in a grow light that will bring in the type of light that the plant requires in order to thrive, because plants eat sunshine. It's a good way to think about it. If they don't have sunshine, they will die. They're not getting one of the most important elements that plants need, all living creatures need, and that is sunlight. So sunlight first and foremost. And then we'll get back into different areas, or maybe we'll do that right now. Why don't we talk about some of the strongest light? If you had very much like this window here, this is a south facing door, and so it is getting the strongest light that this room is getting, and we want to consider how close to that light we're going to be placing the plant, because we'll want to place our more succulent and thicker leafed plants that can handle more of the more intense rays of the sun, and actually be able to photosynthesize it without having any burning to the leaves. Because if we take thinner, and this is a cactus, for example, not to just skip over that, for the closest to the strongest light in your home or office, those are great places for succulents, cacti. This is a jade plant, absolutely one of my favorites. There's all different varieties. This almost looks like a miniature because the leaves are as small as they are. There's all different varieties. This is Echeveria, another succulent that we have. They would love a windowsill. They would love something very close to the light and really do well for you over there. But then other tropical plants who thrive in sunny situations don't want the intensity of the strongest light of the day burning in on them, and those would be plants that have thinner leaves. They aren't able to handle as much of that intensity, but they still need light. This, I want to say, is a calathea. It's a variegated tropical leaf. It likes lower light. Now, it still wants light, so putting it on a table or on a plant stand at a distance from the light is going to be a better location in a lighted room for a plant like this. Now, croton over here is a plant that I've come to notice loads of people that come into our store love croton. Now, I lived in Florida for 20 years, so croton grew everywhere, and it grows very quickly. Like some of the plants we consider weeds up here in New England, croton can have that reputation down in Florida or in the warmer areas. And although this has a thinner leaf, there is a succulence to this a little bit. It is a milky plant, almost like poinsettia when the leaves break off, but this can absolutely handle more light. It will actually provide better variation and variegation in the leaf with more light on a plant like that, excuse me. Another thing to just mention also is that plants that bloom, there are plants that will survive and live good lives in lower light. They will just be more green and vegetative in their growth and appearance. And Anthurium is a good example of that. This is a tropical plant that throws a beautiful flower of all different sizes, depending on the size of the plant and the variety of Anthurium that it is. In the cut flower business, we get Anthurium that are probably about that big, and they're pretty fantastic. But what you'll notice is that when an Anthurium or a plant like it is kept in a lighted area, it will grow these flowers. When an Anthurium is kept in more of a low light area, it has beautiful vegetation, as you might be able to see, but no flowers, because it's not getting as much of the energy that it needs in order to process it and give the output of a flower. So happy plant, healthy plant, just not in its ultimate environment where it will show you how pretty it is, how pretty the flower is that it can produce for you, and just for life is truthfully what it's doing. Another plant that I think we have found pretty fascinating here is, and we have an example. This is a snake plant. It's also referred to affectionately as mother-in-law's tongue, or not so affectionately maybe. And this is a succulent that is almost like cardboard. It's got a very thick leaf to it. It does fabulous in the sun, but it's also a great plant for a lower light area. It can really reproduce and become a nice full plant and sustain itself without all the sunlight. And when it does have sunlight and it's very happy in its spot, it will even throw a flower. And most people haven't seen flowers in snake plants, but here at DiMeco's we have, and so we can tell you that firsthand. That's what a snake plant will do in the right environment for itself. And this plant right here is a variation. It is another, it's called Sansevieria, which is a snake plant. It has more of, not quite a barrel leaf, but in a barrel style versus a very flat leaf. And this is a happy plant. It has had the proper amount of sun because it is shooting a flower right here. Now, what that matures into may not become a showstopper, and yet it will be a showstopper in its own right, because most people aren't used to seeing flowering snake plants. Moving from sunlight and exposure to the sun in the space, and moving on to water. Water is a misunderstood care technique for plants. It is absolutely essential. However, water does not equal love. Okay? So We love our plants, and it really is not it could be the difference between a green or a black thumb. And so really we all have green thumbs. It's just relating to the plant more in a different way than maybe we have before. Even considering relating to a plant might be a new thing altogether, and yet the outcome and the benefits from approaching our plants from a place of relationship rather than decor in the room is going to yield a much better outcome for everyone, because that symbiotic relationship between plants and people is very, very real. As we were mentioning during the sunlight phase, plants eat sunlight and they produce vegetation for themselves. It expands and grows the plant, and it takes and makes oxygen for people to breathe. And so by bringing plants into our home space, we're really creating and adding something to the environment, which is a relationship if we open it to be that. So from sunlight, we are moving on to water again, and water does not equal love. Water equals hydration, and we know how critical hydration is for all of us. And we really, most of us appreciate that water is essential for plants, and yet it can also be the downfall. Too much water causes a lot of issues to the health and well-being of plants, almost all of them. There's a prescribed amount, and it's not, you know, to a millimeter, but it's timing, it's how we water. And that's what I want to get into a little bit with you, so that you have another way of thinking about watering your plants. And of course, as we were talking about in the last segment with sun exposure and sunlight, different plants require different watering. So to give you a few examples, like we did for the sun, we have succulents, we've got blooming plants, we have lucky bamboo, which is a plant and a care that's very different. We're going to get into that. Let's start with the type of water, because there's different types of waters. There's tap water, there's rainwater, there's filtered water, there's distilled water. And really what's best for the plants, and it really does depend on the water at your home. If you're using city water versus well water, those are different considerations. The types of metals or additives that may be in the water can affect the plants. One of the things that I came to appreciate when somebody shared this with me is that the more metals or other types of contaminants that are in the water, it makes it more difficult for the plants to take up the water, because they're laden with the contaminants of the metals, and it can then further stress the plants. And certainly fluorides and chlorine or chlorides that are put into town waters for good reason, or for reasons that we understand, are harmful and can really lead to a shortened life for your plant. So having discussed the different types of water, we're going to get into how do we water? What's the best way to water? Because if we don't water the plants the way the plants need to be watered, we could be causing them harm rather than good. And so let's just talk about different ways of delivering water to the plants. One is with a watering can right to their roots. Another way is misting and giving the water to the leaves rather than the roots. And another way is watering from the bottom up rather than the top down. And there's reasons for all of them. Then there's also what type of watering can, because for me, when I'm watering indoor plants, I like to have a narrow spout on the watering can. It just allows for more focused watering. Another type of watering can, which is excellent for other reasons, is a spray watering can. But as you can see with the spray watering can, it's got a rather wide area that it's watering, and for a small vessel that isn't going to be the way to go. But this is a very gentle spray, so it will not disturb newly planted seeds, or there's a real benefit to having a soft spray can like this. And yet for the indoor plants, because of the size that it's indoors not outdoors, I do like a smaller can and certainly a narrower spout. And then for spraying, this is decorative. I love this container, and I meant to grab one of our utility sprayers, but it's a plastic bottle. It has a larger reservoir than this. Oh, here's one example. Thanks, Jen. It's a fabulous sprayer. I don't have water in this, but this sprays very traditionally. It's really sweet, and it looks nice on the shelf with your plants, so that's a good reason to have it. And then this, just put it away, but it's got an incredible stream. You see, it keeps going. I can't say enough about a spray bottle like this. We have the traditional sprayers for some of our other applications, and yet for misting plants, air plants, just giving them that tropical little bit of humidity in the air, these are fantastic. They're just a great spray bottle, so we really do recommend that. And as far as, I did make a quick mention to bottom up watering versus top down watering, but so bottom up watering is good for plants such as African violets, where they might have fuzzy leaves. There's other examples in the succulent family. I think it's a crassula of some type that has a fuzzy, like lamb's ear style leaf. Better to water them from the bottom up. They like to drink through their roots, and you're not causing harm or discoloration to the fancy leaves on the top. So when we are watering traditionally, though, from the top down, it's important that we water all the way through. And the way that we do that is we go ahead and water, and take it slow, because it does take, if the plants have been well cared for and it hasn't been too long between waterings, it'll just take a little bit of time before the water comes down. If the water comes through right away, there's a good chance the roots are dried and the dirt is dried to the roots. So the water can't be absorbed. Everything's been caked together. And that's a very common thing that can happen when we have plants in our lives and we're not in a regular routine of watering them at certain intervals. They will dry so tight, and then we do what we think is best, which is heavy water. Water, 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 drown them, drown them, drown them. And yet if they can't take it up, it's not going where it needs to go. So this plant has the right soil, which we'll get into in a little bit, and it has been watered well. And see, just that last little bit got the water to come down and drip through. So that has been a well-watered plant. And it's going to, you want to figure about 20% of the water that you poured in should come out, and that's when it's fully watered. And then you just pour that off. You don't want the plants to be sitting in water that has watered through, because what can happen is that the metals and whatnot will settle into the water in the tray, and then it's the heavier metals that are going to be drawn back up. It can cause them to sit in water, which can cause root rot for so many plants. So you just want to water it and then let it dry out. If you're doing other things, come back and then just, let that go. If you have a plant, now this is a plant with holes in the bottom. This is a planter with holes in the bottom. And so that's a critical element as to why that watering technique works. Now this is a different type of pot. Rather than one with holes in the bottom, this has a closed bottom. It's a glazed ceramic. Not ideal, and yet decorative and beautiful. and still great for plants if you plant them correctly. And so what we do is we put a bottom layer of gravel so that the water has a place to sit below the root line, and it'll evaporate and just kind of vaporize down there. It won't make the plant's roots sit in water. So very important is maybe water just about to 2/3. You're not going for that heavy water. Give it a chance to settle down. And then what I'll do is I'll just hold this plant and pour any excess water off after it's had a chance to take it in. And that's this plant can thrive in here even though there's no drainage. If you prefer, and if you're not looking to give as much time as figuring 2/3 versus watering all the way through, I'm going to recommend that you find planters such as terracotta, other types of clay pots that have holes in the bottom, because ideally they're working as in partnership with us and the plant to pull the moisture away. Unglazed clay and stoneware will pull excess moisture from the plant into itself, and that is a very healthy way of ensuring that plants aren't getting overwatered or sitting in water too long. Really important. Did you have a question, Jen?
Did you share about distilled water, like the specifics about it?
If I didn't mention about distilled water is an ideal watering agent because all of the impurities have been removed. Some people will think about boiling water or ask, should I boil water? And essentially what I understand about boiling water is it makes the heavy metals be concentrated in the water because they don't actually vaporize. They're actually in the water. And so by boiling, you're making it more concentrated. You're making the water more concentrated in its impurities because we're vaporizing out that water and holding on to a higher concentration of metals. So no boiling when it comes to this, but a good way of approaching it using tap water, for example, is to pour that water off, fill your watering cans or your 1 gallon jugs, and let them sit. Because by allowing it to sit, it's going to achieve more than one objective. One is that your heavier contaminants will fall to the bottom of the jar, and very importantly, additionally, the temperature of the water will be more favorable to the plants, because particularly this time of year, the tap water is freezing cold, and it can cause a shock and cause the roots to kind of, I don't know if they cringe, whatever happens, but they will not take up that water as easily as they would if it was at a room temperature, just a lukewarm is what's best for them. There's other elements to consider about water, and this goes whether you're caring for indoor plants or outdoor plants, but the pH of the water is another important thing, and this comes into play for all of the plants, and depending on how many plants you're raising, you may get deeper and deeper into these other ways of helping them. But a neutral pH is really what most plants are going for. Some may do a little better in acidic soil, and some may have tendencies towards a basic side. But in general, neutral water is a 7.0 if you're doing a litmus test, or we've got like these rapid test readers for figuring out water pH, but neutral water is 7.0, and ideally you want to be between 6.5 and 7.5 for almost all of the plants. So if you're testing your water to see if it's basic or acidic, you're going for that 6.5 to 7.5. There are ways of adjusting the acidity, and we're happy to talk to you another time about that, for raising or lowering the acidity in your soil. There's different natural additives that you can work into the soil to help if they've already been affected by water that they've been receiving. Just to check real quick, I think that's everything that I wanted to share about water. We did touch on the porosity, is the word for clay, where it will pull the moisture away from the plant that's housed in there, or glazed potteries. Another important, and this is going to be the last one we're going to talk about today, important care technique to be mindful of is the type of medium that you're planting your plants in, or that you've purchased them in, because we might need to amend the soil to help the plant thrive. The medium that most plants are started in, if they're started from seed, is a soilless medium. And it's usually made of peat moss, maybe some sphagnum moss, but perlite or vermiculite, to keep it nice and airy. And it's usually, that's a great way to start plants from seed, because anything heavier may prevent the seed from germinating and actually getting started. So seedless matter is the best thing to start plants in. Soilless matter, excuse me, for starting seeds in, and then your younger plants. And then depending on the type of plant, there's certainly succulent and cactus soil, which will be better draining to prevent them from, they need less moisture stored and just take it from time to time. So we don't want soil that's going to be heavy for them. We want soil that's going to aerate and allow for airflow into them, and drying out, not allowing the roots to get oversaturated, and allowing them to dry out between waterings. Then we've got soils that are made of organic matter that have more nutrients. Some of them have compost mixed in that has been prepared to give the soil the nutrients that the plants need, so that they are getting, really, soil is one of the most important elements of how a plant thrives. Although the sunshine, the water, and the soil, I'd say those are the triumvirate, if that's a word that we want to use. Sort of like when you're raising a baby. You just brought a baby home and the baby's crying. We check for whether the baby's hungry, whether the diaper's wet, whether they're, they're the things that we go to first. These are the things that we go to first for plants. So here's a good example, because this isn't as interactive as an in-person workshop might be. I'm going to put a few things out there. How do I know when my plant is in need of water? Well, the best way, and I wish I had I'm glad I don't have an example for you, actually, because our plants are hydrated, but they catch our attention when we walk into this store, almost like that, because their posture will change. They'll slump a little bit. The leaves may curl over. It's easy to notice on softer leafed plants, like this, this has two names, Syngonium over here, has a thin leaf. So if it were needing water, it would likely just start folding over, almost like spathiphyllum or a peace lily. If you've had one of those, it's like we say they're fainting, and what they're doing is they're communicating with us. They're showing us that something's not right, and we can recognize that that's most likely the first thing I'm going to do is put my finger in the soil or lift up the plant. Water's heavy, and it's very apparent if you lift up a plant and it just lifts like a feather, there's very little water. That may be the way the plant likes it, so knowing the nature of the plant and what its preferences are would be important. But plants don't want to be without moisture. They just all like varying degrees of moisture. So, but when a plant, it looks like it's droopy or fainting, first thing I check is how moist, damp, or dry is the soil. And this is a very similar, I'm saying that the plant needs water because typically that will be what the plant needs. But just like in people, the symptom might be misleading, and we may think that it's not enough water, but not enough water can also but what not enough water looks like can also mean too much water. It could mean that the plant is drowning. And if there's more than one person caring for the plants, that can happen more oftentimes than not. And the plant is folded over because it's drowning. The roots are drowning, and it's suffocating. So rather than just trusting that a wilting leaf means water, let the wilting leaf get your attention and then test the soil. Pick up the plant, see if that's actually what it needs, and if it does, then go ahead and give it water, just as we discussed. Let it run down and drain out, and then be back in its spot. And within a very short period of time, depending on how long that plant was getting thirsty or without water, it should be back in its happy posture within a very short period of time, within minutes, an hour, or possibly by the next day for most plants. So that's one way to recognize they're talking to you. And the other thing is, if you try the water, so we check the baby, we see if the baby is hungry, but the baby's not taking the bottle. So then we're gonna go and check the bum and see if the diaper's full. So with the plants, if the water's fine and the plant is postured over, then we have to look deeper. We've got to see, are there any bugs around the plant? Is there anything growing on the plant, such as scale? Are there aphids? That's an indication that it's something different than the water. It could be the sunlight. It may not be getting the right exposure. It may not be as dire as a bug infestation. But by starting with the water and then trying the plant in maybe a different part of the room or in a different room altogether to see if maybe the light exposure isn't quite right for it in the space that you have it, is a great next step to try. And then thirdly, after that, if the sun isn't doing it for you, then I'd also be looking at the soil. See if maybe you need to add a little bit of compost or try out a natural fertilizer, because that's another way that you can supplement the plant, is by adding different types of nutrients or just a very simple indoor plant fertilizer. And then if your plant still seems to be suffering, take a picture. If the temperature's okay outside, bring it into DiMeco's. Check with us, and we'll be happy to see if there's anything we can do to help you remedy it, because it might be a Plant Care 201 question and not a Plant Care 101. So we're here to help anytime that we can. We're happy to answer questions if you want to call on the phone or come in person. We hope that you've enjoyed and benefited from the information shared here today. We could certainly go on and on because there's much more to the world of plants that we're looking forward to sharing with you. But hopefully this is a good first step in developing your confidence, because your competence has been grown. So thanks again, wishing you all the best, and we look forward to chatting with you again soon. Take care.